Greetings. Welcome to Eric's Angle, the podcast for Iowa State mathematics students. I am your host, Eric Weber, chair of the mathematics department. Today's guest is not a cyclone. His name is Matt Pettis, and he is a senior data scientist based in Minneapolis. Matt and I went to Gustavus Adolphus College together many years ago. Matt then went on to earn master's degrees in both mathematics and environmental engineering from Northwestern University. Matt is a true Renaissance man. He finds something that interests him and he pursues it with a passion. For example, he uses reinforcement learning to program thermostats. Please welcome Matt Pettis. Hi, Matt. Thanks for appearing on my podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for asking me. It's really great to be here.
So, Matt, why don't you tell our audience, since you're not actually an ISU alum, which we will not hold against you, you're the first guest of my podcast that's not an ISU alum. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So I'm Matt Pettis. I am a data scientist at Train Technologies up in Minnesota, up in St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul area. We make HVAC equipment, especially on the commercial side, where if you go to a large building like either a Home Depot or a Walmart or any large place, or even a school campus, we may have our equipment on your campus. If you need to heat and cool very large buildings like dormitories and things like that, we make the equipment that does that. We make things called rooftop units that will cool it and chillers that will cool it as well. And we do large buildings, but I'm a data scientist and I work on taking some of that data and trying to do optimization and other things we can do with the data to help building operators run these things at more efficient with more efficient regimes, and also try to do more optimizations to make sure we do better carbon capture or carbon reduction output for the machinery that we do. So that's a little bit where I am right now.
So when you say optimization, are you talking about like actual mathematical models?
Yeah. So just as if you have any people who are mathematical, but also in the engineering field, there's a field called control theory or controls optimization, where you run a plant. Like, so if I want to cool a building, and I have throughout the day and I have people coming in and out, but like in a school building or in like a classroom building, you may have people coming in from 8 to 4, but you're not going to run it the same way at night that you do throughout the day. So you can run and create algorithms to say, how do I cool this throughout the day? And how do I make this, optimal to make sure people have comfort, make sure they have enough pure or clean oxygen and not carbon dioxide heavy air in there. And you have to make up sequences to say, based on feedback from like from a thermometer or a set point, and and making these things and say like, well, how do I optimally programmability and do these things? In addition to that, if you are running things that like our manufacturing plant and you live in something like, say, Texas or somewhere like Texas, you may pay different rates at different times of day. And so you may want to be able to shift around your cooling load. Say, maybe I want to make things a little bit more uncomfortably cool in the morning and, and not use so much in the afternoon. So how do you optimize around that, knowing what those schemes are? And those are all mathematical models that you make. You take inputs such as like rate schemes from the electric company and how your building operates, and you program these things together along with engineers and other people who are building experts.
So when you are doing these types of things, are you doing a lot of coding?
Yes and no. I'll say this. So yes, in fact, so my expertise, like in the coding that I do for data science, if you are a person who does data science, you'll see that you'll probably either be optimally working or most commonly working in Python, or I came up in R, and I still love R because I think it has better graphics and things like that. But I'll code up demos and mock up things like that because I still want to be able to get my hands around the data, even if it's limited. And then when it goes to be used by in production or by a broad use of people, then usually I give it off to more professional software developers who have to code it for scale, and they'll take what I do as a basis and then say, well, I'll stick it over here, and there's a lot more downstream work that they have to do and make it. But yes, I do coding pretty much daily on that basis, but I work with smaller data sets to prove out whether or not something is feasible or not to do. So yeah, so I do quite a bit of coding.
So, as kind of an offhanded comment, I've been thinking recently about how the way I conceptualize mathematics is it's a science, but not really an experimental science. But to me, it almost sounds like you're doing experiments, proof of
Yeah,
concept experiments.
yeah. I mean, from like I said, from when I took math, I mean, the math you were doing it was a lot of like proving things, right? But even in the process of learning and doing proofs, like it was a lot of trial and error. You develop skills and you develop things that you can use, tools that are at your ready that you can reliably use. But like when you're learning, especially, at that level, you're learning tools that you can use and will use. But when you get out into the wild and start using it, you still have to experiment, like what will work, what won't work. And you have to think a little bit more meta mathematically about you have to use the math, but you have to say like, well, what are the inputs I'm going to have to a certain model? Will mathematics aside, is there any sort of signal or is there any sort of information in there that allows me to get to result? I think that either I or a reasonably sophisticated algorithm could actually figure something out. The example I always had when I was working in a different company doing similar work was they wanted me to predict oil prices based on a data set that had nothing to do with oil. And I had to go back and tell them that, well, it's like trying to predict oil prices based off the Nielsen ratings of the show Friends in the 90s, right? From back in the day. I was like, there's just no information in here for you to do it. So you know how the mathematics works and you learn how those tools are. But when you start to weld it together with what you have to do some meta analysis about what information do I think the mathematics has even a chance of doing or not doing. So yeah, and they always have to say is like, well, they always say, well, you can machine learn it, but the long or the short version of that is that mathematics makes a really good servant, but not really a good boss, right? Like mathematics is something that you, at least in the places that I do it, you use to try to describe the world and try to capture some of the modeling and have some regularity and predictability, but it's still up to you to match up the real world inputs with any models that you make. In that case, it is sort of experimental. The math is sort of tried and true, but you have to know, you know, how much of reality the mathematics describes and how much of the reality your modeling leaves out.
So do you spend a fair amount of time then trying to communicate your ideas to people that don't have the same kind of background as we do?
Absolutely. And they have, to varying degrees, they have some background. They're usually somewhat, proficient about like the ideas about what can and cannot be done, but you still have to describe to them, or you still have to explain to them, saying if they have an idea and they'll get really excited about like, I want to do this sort of modeling with this sort of data, you have to be able to probe them and question and find out what data do they actually have, what are their ideas, what's the potential of data that they can give you, what is it they're trying to accomplish, and knowing how the mathematics works, or how, like in my case, the mathematics behind the machine learning algorithms is to say, yeah, it can or can't work, or it might work, I still need to know more information, or can you get more information? So it really is, I mean, I do a lot of heads down coding, but most of the time that's, as you move up, and maybe I should say it this way, is that I used to do a lot of coding at the front end, but at some point I'm actually moving through and putting that off on the people who come in early, or who are coming in new. And then I'm doing a lot more communicating and coordinating, because that's the biggest issue that we have to do.
So do you have like a team of staff members that are working underneath you then?
Yeah, I have at various cases. Where I am right now, I have a team of one. Our data science group is sort of split up, and I carved off. So I have one reporting to me right now, and I do a lot of guiding of her. She's relatively new to the program, but I offload a lot of the coding and a lot of the exploration to say, how do you get the data, and how do you, or how do you actually do the modeling? leave that to her. From what I've learned from here, what I'm usually guiding her on also is things like, where do you find the data? Who do you talk to? How do you and even at this stage is like, how do you put together presentations and data to talk back to the people who are asking you for things, or to replay this stuff? And there's a whole, and maybe I don't know, you or someone would do this, maybe in the stats, is to talk through the ideas of data presentation through the ideas of Edward Tufte, of like, how do you summarize data so that people can understand it, right? And that's huge. Like, there's the work that you do to try to figure out what's going on, but then you have to summarize that data in ways that other people can understand. You can't just put a messy graph up and wave your hands and point to stuff and say, this is how it works. You have to think really hard about where people are coming from, where they're starting. What do you put on a graph to be able to convey what it is that you want to do? And that's a lot more of my work, because you have to, I mean, so many ideas die on the vine in work, not just in data science, but other places, that get solved by communication. If you can't communicate and get the right people excited and lined up behind you, you can't get your ideas out into production and being viable.
So you've had quite a few positions in your career.
Mhm.
And so I wonder if you can give our students, my students, a sense of what's out there coming from a mathematics program. What are the opportunities that they might think about if that they might not be aware of as a student, but if they
Okay.
knew about it, they'd say, "Oh, that sounds interesting."
Some of these are hard to say that they line up with the mathematics, but that you have to come into and do. And probably I'll start with things that you probably are out there, but just for completeness, laid out there. I mean, there's actuary, which is very akin to data science, that you could get into to do these things. There is consulting, where you walk in and you're the person who, if you have some mathematical knowledge and a little bit of ability to use things like Python or R to at least like get data out of spreadsheets or CSV files and displayed and thought through, you can fit in as a utility player in any team, and then you can move into other positions that you might want to use. And the other things is that when you do mathematics, you come in, you do a lot of analyst work, right? Like, you can do this here. So I'm in the manufacturing space. You can do this in the financial space. You can do this in the legal space, which is where I started. You can do this in education as well, just to put some of these things together. And then you can move on to more leadership possibilities as well. And I'm going to skip to that part a little bit, because, as I said, when you start working your mathematical ideas of how to put this stuff together, which is really valuable, and people do. That's where data science and the whole AI work comes from. But like, what you need is someone who can actually summarize that data and communicate, or have a dialogue with whatever the back end algorithm is, and be able to present that, back to the people. And that's where your mathematics now becomes more of a servant, rather than as the boss, to say like, okay, I can do these, I can understand what's going on, I can coordinate, and I can communicate my ideas and move forward. So for places to go into, I guess it's hard, because I have been around. Like I said, you can go into large companies, they have analyst positions. You can go into smaller companies if you have a data science background, or not even data science, but just mathematics plus coding. You can do these things and walk in as a tester or as an analyst and work your way in there. And the weird thing that I didn't understand coming out of college, when I got to the workforce, was that, every business, once you open that door, every ecosystem that's a company has its own niches and needs that are there. And if you can get in the door with like an analyst position, you can look around, talk to people, and see what needs are and what slots there are that need to be filled, and you can move into them. And your mathematics gives you that sort of that key to that door to say, like, I can competently handle lots of things that are algorithmic and mathematical, but I can also figure out how my actual company works, or what the needs of my company are to survive, and make that happen. So you depress me if I haven't been specific enough, but I'll start with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned working in the legal space. I mean, you
Mhm,
mentioned that to me off camera, but just now as well.
mhm.
Do you want to walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So when I started, I started back in 1999, back when there was the dot-com boom, which is honestly before probably a lot of your students were even born. And it's kind of the same cycle or a very similar cycle as to the AI cycle that's happening now in terms of hype and how technology is playing into our social lives. When I started there, I had an engineering background and a mathematical background, and engineering was still moving slow. But during the dot-com boom, I went in and I interviewed and had a couple of questions. But the biggest question I had from the manager was, do you know how to do time series forecasting for something? They had to predict how many users were coming on that they had to service because they had a data center like now that Amazon has right now. We had our own, and they're like, and they were in 1999 when I started, they had hockey stick growth because the internet had just come online. They had moved some of their product from old-fashioned mainframes to web browsers, which were new at the time, and their growth was going through the roof. And they needed someone to wrap their head around how this was growing. And they asked me, could you deal with the model? And truthfully, I had never done it before. Even I had done other mathematical models, but not time series. I hadn't been in the space. I mean, I hadn't even worked in business up to this point. I'd been in school. I had taught middle school, but I had a math degree. And I thought, well, I know how math works. I can probably do this. And they said, great. When can you start? I mean, they very rarely has ever happened to me that they hired me out of the gate on something, especially at that time. And it was because I had a confidence, in mathematics. I knew mathematics. I could do these things, and they had a very specific need that had a mathematical requirement, and I could do it. And since I had the confidence to do it, they picked me up. And then I once I got in the company, I did that for a few years, but went through and I learned how to do other coding. I worked on some other projects and put things together that I actually ended up moving off that particular job. But like I would move around the company as most people do, and find out how the company works and what needs there were and what fit with my interests at the time as well. So yeah, so I came in and it just sort of sucked me in because I said I could do it and they really wanted it, and I thought it was seemed like an interesting thing to do at the time.
So I think to me, the key word there is the confidence to know that your training was up to the task of whatever they were going to ask you to do because it was mathematical and you had a good mathematical training. And so I find that fascinating because I'm guessing a lot of students may not feel that way, especially say they're a new graduate. But
hmm
if you can be confident in your training, then you can be up to the task for whatever they might throw at you.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, it is a hard thing, I think, when you come through school, especially like if you're doing like honestly, mathematics was hard. You had hard classes and you didn't always feel like you knew when you got done. You're like, I don't know how I got done and how I passed, but I learned there. But as you distance yourself, you get some reflection and you understand what you do and don't know. And also you come to realize that you work really hard at these things. A lot of the problems that you hit in the wild are ones that you solve over and over again. Once you start to specialize and get in there, once you find a problem, you have a little more time to breathe. When you're doing mathematics at the university level, every year you're doing a different thing. You're doing complex analysis, you're doing real analysis, you're doing modern algebra, right? Like you move from topic to topic, and you don't get a chance to sort of like take your breath and revisit those things real easily all the time. Versus in work, like once you solve something, you start to solve very similar problems over and over again because you realize that what you want is automation and scale in very many cases. So you'll have a chance to breathe. So even if you don't feel like you have the confidence coming up, because like, I hit a whole bunch of topics like a fire hose coming at me, or I had to drink from a fire hose. When you get to work, you realize that the pace can slow down. You can actually study a problem, and you'll come to find, and hopefully you have this belief before you come out saying like, even if like you felt like you're drinking from a fire hose in college or in university, you'll have a chance to actually start to apply those skills and some time to breathe and probably be better than you may suspect you are at that point. It does help to believe that out of the gate, but you get the proof of that once you actually start to do it.
Right. So I'm wondering if there's like one thing you might recommend for my students to think about is now that they're in college at university. Is there one recommendation you would give them to maybe think about that we don't typically focus on as a math program?
So I'll say some things that maybe you are and aren't, but the thing that I didn't do that I found really helpful, that now that I have kids that are about the same age going through the same thing, is like really go to your career center, really look into internships, really talk to people, because you're having these podcasts, I assume, like this to meet people and say, what's it like out in the world, which is great. But you should augment that with like talking to people and finding people saying, these are my skills. What can I do? What are you looking for, in jobs? And the people who come to talk to you at career fairs or things like that are the ones who know what the jobs are that you have. So really, like, mathematics, like the way when I did mathematics, like I loved it. It was fun, but I was pretty heads down. It was the people who I really saw who flourished and like really got a sense of like not only what was out there, but a sense of their own sort of like I said, confidence, is when they talk to people and said, oh, you can do these things. These are the things that we have at our particular company. And that can start to give you confidence as well. Plus, it lets you meet people. And those are the people who are going to get you in. And the other thing is the other thing I'll offer to that is that you don't have to know exactly what you're going to do when you come out at 22. If you're going to go into the field, find something that starts you, into something, and you're going to grow and you're going to make decisions after you get to the company or wherever you're working that lead you there. But you don't have to know that leaving college at this point. You have a chance to look around, to poke around and grow and find things that do and do not interest you and pursue those, as necessary. But you don't have to know that out of the gate. Don't let that discourage you on anything.
That's great advice. I appreciate that. I'm glad that you said it.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's nice. That's why you talk to other people too, not just me, but other people, and they'll probably tell you the same thing.
Yes. Matt, I'd like to thank you again for appearing on Eric's Angle.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was really great to see you again and to be here.